Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Art of Creation show, where we look at how choice creates and different possibilities for creating a life and a living that work for you now and to create a future that works for everyone on the planet. What would it take for that to be totally cool and easy? So I am your host, Rebecca Boswell, and today I have the pleasure of having a conversation with Tara McCallum. Tara is an international artist, amazing artwork. You can see one of her pieces behind her. And not only does she paint with a brush and with pigment, she also uses energy to navigate the canvas and create what she calls energy paintings, which I really look forward to exploring with her in more detail in this episode. In addition, she also is a web designer, creating all kinds of digital art as well, and an energy facilitator, creating all of these magical colors and all the magical vibrancy that she creates in her paintings and in the web design through people who actually come to choose her sessions and her classes, and just facilitating them to find that vibrancy and that color in their own lives. So Tara, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm so awesome, like really enjoying today, and even everything that happens, like that's funny with electronics and just how life shows up and really reflects back to us how expansive we are.
Yes, and sometimes more blatantly and front and center than we anticipate. But how does it get any better than that? Now, Tara, I see a painting behind you. Is that one of yours?
Yeah, it's definitely one of my paintings. It is not an energy painting. It's slightly different. It was more of a commission that somebody wanted, just capturing the mountains in a different way than like how he saw it. And then he's a snowboarder, so like capturing that. So slightly different. Generally, I go to a canvas without a preconceived idea. Mm-hmm. I go really first with the foundation of tapping into a person and like sensing them and perceiving them, and then go and allow like water, paint, energy all to form and move without directing or like not without controlling it.
Yeah.
So this was a different piece to that. I really enjoy the just going and like really playing, and yeah.
I can really perceive the play in the painting. And you say, oh, this isn't an energy painting, and to me, I look at it and I'm like, wow, I perceive a lot of energy there. So wow, what would it take when you who are viewing, when you see the show notes, we will have links in there so you can actually go through and see a whole collection of Tara's artwork, and you can see some of the differences and see what you perceive in looking at the different paintings. So Tara, our show today, our episode is entitled Always Enough and Never Too Much. Mm-hmm. So when we were talking about this topic, we were looking at all kinds of things, and I've been noticing a lot of people playing with what is it to be enough, and where we're not enough, and what if we were never enough, right? Which kind of goes right in the opposite direction if you're going to make it linear of like wanting to be enough, right? Like, oh man, I can never get there. So what is this conversation for you, and where would you like to start in terms of like what is enough and not enough, and all of those really interesting things that we buy into as real?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting space that we can use to like judge ourselves, the words, right? Because it really like can be a playful space of like, well, what if like not being enough is actually an invitation to play with more, rather than like this judgment on yourself, like, oh, I need to be something already.
Yeah.
And like you can go so many directions with it, because like you can say, okay, we've already arrived here in our bodies and chose our bodies as infinite beings, so we have the capacity to everything, so we really are already enough. And yet, like, I desire always to create more, and anyone when I'm with, I could even look and say, well, you're not enough, because like, what would it take for us to constantly expand? So not from a judgment point of view, but just as a place of not being complacent. Like, I don't desire to ever be done.
Yeah.
You know?
And there are so many pieces there, this whole thing of like, and I see it all the time. I mean, we see it in advertising where where the advertisers are actually keying right into that place where any of us have bought into not being enough, right? And when we look at books that are out there, when we look at products that are available for clothing, for, faces, and for looking younger, and for being more beautiful, and all kinds of things, right? It's always kind of geared in this reality towards you having this niggling little sense that I might not be good enough, but maybe, just maybe, if I bought this, or if I tried this, or I did this, or I had that, maybe I would, even if I wasn't totally enough, maybe I would at least look like it to other people, and I could pull a fast one, right? Yeah. And yet, right? Like, how much can we really acknowledge that is an energy and a prevalent thing that exists? And as long as we buy into that as real, it will continue to persist, right? So whether we're aligning and agreeing with it or resisting and reacting to it, we're just making it more and more solid. And yet, what if we could actually acknowledge the oneness and the possibility of being a whole being that is always enough. Always enough. Like, we get to be here because we already are here, and that's it. Right? Like, there is no because. Like, I am enough because doesn't really exist. It's just I be. Yeah. And that's it. Like, that's enough. Now, you introduce this next piece of like, it's never enough. Yeah. So then, right? So then it's like, well, wait a minute. My brain is starting to, smoke and sizzle. Because wait a minute, I thought you just said we're always enough. So then if we're never enough, how can that exist in the same space? Now, you said something about it not being judgment related, right? Yes. So when we go to not being enough from a place of judgment, right, we're looking at all these places where we're broken, we're insufficient, we're lacking, whatever. And you're talking about never enough from a very different and more expansive space without judgment. So can we talk a little bit more about that space and what invitation that is, and our viewers who may again be like, wait a minute, these are two opposites, right? What can we invite as a possibility beyond that polarity?
It's a really awesome space, and it's interesting because I actually did an art class on it the other night where we wrote down everything that we are and all the choices that we make and acknowledged those pieces. So that's like the wholeness of being us. And then we were identifying what our future asks are. So, and really what that place was for every single person, which was a huge aha for me, is it was an expansion on what we already are. And so if we're acknowledging that we're whole, so like, you have a whole seed that you put in the ground that's fully the microcosm of the tree or whatever it is. It's fully whole, and yet it's asking to expand in new ways. It's expanding into roots and connecting to more things. It's expanding into the air and becoming leaves, but it's also expanding in the fact that it's like connecting to more than just dirt. It's connecting to water, air, sunlight, birds, people,
Yeah.
all of it. And that's where I come from, is like, cool, I was a seed. And then cool, I was like this little branch. And it's like, what else? Like, what else, what else, what else? And who else would like to play? And coming from that space of not judging that, oh, I once was a seed, like, cool that I was a seed. And I'm still a seed. And I still produce seeds. But like, how much more expanding can I have? How many more people can I play with? And when you come from the place of that acknowledgement of wholeness, rather than what so much marketing does of like, what's your broken part? And you never actually fix the broken part because you were never broken in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's like you're trying to fix something that wasn't ever a problem. Instead, you get to just go out and go, okay, so what else today? Like, what else can I play with? Who else can I play with? What else can I create? Like, how does this limb want to, like, and capture?
Well, and when we're looking at how choice creates, right, and that really it's that choice creates, and we're looking at the ways in which we can see it, right, in our everyday lives and get it when it's like, oh, this is a moment where I'm actually choosing, right? And it's like in that moment, we can actually choose to be a fractured piece of some other whole outside of ourselves. Or we could choose to be whole as is, and that whole be part of all that is. And of course, I'm putting it into two pieces just for the sake of the conversation. And I'll just mention too, there's and all the other things infinitely that are possible, outside of those two choices. But it's like if we're going to distill it down to something very clear, it's like, oh, okay, so I always have a choice. So what do I want to function from? Like, if I have a core way of being, do I want to function from half full, right? Or would I like to function from half empty? Or would I just like to function and just see what shows up and then choose and choose and choose without having to define what I am, right? Like, you can actually ask what you said, like, what am I today? Who am I today? What would I like to choose today? And have so much more actual control in your life. And this is another one of those weird words, right? Like, there's this charge to enough, and then there's this charge to a word like control. Because again, when we do control with judgment, it's such a different energy and such a different space than when we do control and like be control from the point of, I actually am driving the ship of me, right? As opposed to, driving the car from outside the window with a blindfold at 100 miles an hour, right? And being like, oh, well, I didn't want to crash, but I had no choice because I couldn't see it outside the car. And right? It's like, actually, no, you can choose to get in the car and to take the blindfold off and to actually choose, like, would I like to stay on the road? Would I like to go down that side street? Would I like to go into the tree? Like, what would I like to choose here? So I love this. You're talking about your workshop and really exploring this. So you are also a creator coach as well, right? This is so cool. Like, all these places where you're creating in the world and then inviting other people to be able to really experience what it is for themselves using the art and the media that that you have so many capacities with. So when you're in this workshop with people, what do you find showing up that we can share with the viewers, so that they might be able to take away some of the things that they could choose moving forward as they start looking at this kind of strange space to look at, I think.
Sure. There's a couple of things. It's interesting. It's really something that you were saying earlier, this space of choice of like directing your life. And so many people, when they get into like drawing and painting and like writing down the words of what they've created in their lives, they come to this place where they're no longer a victim, not just of the things that they didn't desire, but of a victim of the things happening to them that are great. Really, we can be a victim of all things when we think it just happens to us. When we realize that like we create every single moment, and every moment can be a contribution, and then we can choose to have like expansion out of joy rather than trauma and drama. Like that is what starts to come out as they like identify themselves as the creators. And then they look at how they're playing into the points of view that, you know, you can't have some, like nobody can love you unless they go through the darkness. And it's like, well, what if like I don't require darkness for someone to like be by my side and like love me like immensely? Cool. Like what would I like to create? And so then their asks outside of this, like the middle, the core, like blossom from that space of like really knowing that they are choosers, that they are creators, and it kind of gives them permission to acknowledge themselves as this. And I find that a lot of people, I don't know if they don't feel comfortable acknowledging themselves as brilliant creators. And so it's really fun for them to get into this space with themselves, which is super key, to not just like prove to somebody else, but to say to themselves, like, wow, I'm actually really powerful and potent and yummy.
Yeah.
And I'd like to expand this into my future. And I have the capacity to expand it, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, all these places where, you know, using the word creation and being a creator, you know, I think it's easier sometimes for people to look and be like, oh, I created this piece of art, or I created this business, or I created this tangible thing in the world. And to look at it from this space of like, what about our lives, right? Like, do we, you know, it's like, oh, what if this was actually the masterpiece and the great creation, and everything else within it is just another piece and another expression of that, right? So like the creator of life and living. And it kind of, what I envision there is, you were talking about the tree earlier, and, you know, where it's like, yes, we may have, you know, gazillion creations, and each one of those creations is just another branch on the tree as we're ever expanding, ever evolving. But like, let's not forget that without all of the tree, each of the branches would have nowhere to be, right? And so acknowledging that whole, and I just think it's really brilliant, you know, if someone is like, oh, well, you know, I go to work and I do this, but I don't really create anything. It's like, oh, well, that's an interesting point of view. And so what you're inviting is for people to really acknowledge everything that they're creating, the good, the bad, the ugly, and then to ask if what they're creating is actually not showing up in a way that works, just asking some questions to see, okay, well, what else could I choose here to actually create something else, instead of thinking that there's no way out, right? Or that there's no choice.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who, you know, who comes to you and is like, well, you're a painter, so, you know, you can create easily, or, you know, what do you say to people who are just kind of starting into this conversation and have some real roadblocks or challenges to really stepping into that space of being the creator of their life and living, and taking on, you know, how many people see that as like a huge responsibility? Can it also be fun instead?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, like that's top of my list, is asking people like what is fun for them.
Yeah.
But definitely like where I start off with is energy. And it's the energy behind everything, and the choice to be the energy that you desire in your life.
Yeah.
So it really is removing the space of like, are you a victim to what's happening to you? Like, what if in every moment you could tap into your natural space of being and emanate that. Like, would you be willing to choose if, like, you know, we backtrack and like we talk about like, when were you being yourself? Like, what did that look like, feel like, all of that? And so a lot of people talk about joy, fun, like ease. And I'm like, okay, so if you tap into that, would you be willing to give yourself permission to choose that all the time? And what would that create? And then like we look back at those times when they were like being it and choosing it, and how that affected the people around them. And would they like more of that, where like it is like more easeful? You know, what happens with your eyes when you're being yourself? What happens with your mouth? Like, what happens with the way that your body moves?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you willing to tap into that and know that those choices actually create everything else? Whether you ever touch a paintbrush or make food or anything like that, like, we have such a tangible effect on the world by our choice of energy.
Yeah. And just the choice, even like, what do we choose in the first 60 seconds of getting out of bed in the morning?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like what if we just even invited a noticing there of like, so everyone, if you're watching this, right, when you get up tomorrow morning, just kind of, you know, would you be willing to just notice, what is it, if you could actually be aware of the first 60 seconds of your day, what's showing up? What are some of the things, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions that are running through? And does that actually work? And does that set the stage for creating what you desire to create throughout the day? Or are there maybe some little tweaks that in just that first minute of being awake could be made, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I drag myself out of bed and I'm like, oh, another day, right? The day tends to show up slightly differently than I'm like, okay, what are we going to create today? And what grand and glorious adventures will I have? Who will I get to play with? You know, what can show up that I never even imagined possible? Going into that space of wonder, going into that space of playfulness, and then asking, okay, so when those bits and pieces show up, you know, can I please recognize them? And then would I be willing to choose them? You were talking about things like, you know, joy and where people are enjoying themselves. And, you know, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I don't even really know, you know, like, I don't really know when I'm being me. I don't really know what that's like. You know, I have this and I have that and I have to do this. And, you know, that's kind of fun. But there's this sense of like, oh, I don't even really know what that is for me. So when you have somebody in your workshop or when you're working with a client and you start to have that conversation and they're like, I just don't even know what it is to be me. Like, I can find little glimmers, but it all has to do with something that's filtered through someone else, like my partner or my kids or my family or my job, or right. And they're like, but I don't really know if I was just choosing for me what I would choose. So what do you invite them to? What kinds of questions can you ask them? What would you say with them?
Yeah, so it's different every time. And I really identified with that question just because I probably spent about 10 to 12 years of my life, what I call the walking dead or numb or whatever, because I was so empty of me.
Yeah.
And so filled up with my awareness of everybody else's desires and wishes. And so I would answer the question, the only time I was happy was when I was making someone else happy. And how do I make myself happy other than that? I don't know. And it's like, it's this really wonderful discovery time. And I actually put people on a date with themselves.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I'm like, okay, so if you were getting to know you for the first time, like, how would you show up for you? Like, if you were the one who was dating you, like, you would show up with like eyes glistening and what, like asking like potent questions, like, what would be fun today? Would you like to take a walk? And just being okay with whatever tiny, tiny little thing, like literally my cup of coffee is a big deal to me. Like, I love a certain coffee. And are you willing to expand on that? Like, even if that's all we come up with is that the person is like, my time with my coffee and the kind of coffee that I like, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, how can we expand on that? And would you like to add something else in? Would you like to choose something else for yourself? Even if it's 5 minutes a day. Because that's the reality. Some people think that they have no time for them.
Yeah.
And if I can just get them to give themselves permission, and usually if they're already talking to me, yeah. they're valuing themselves. So we go there. And then there are some clients where they just can't go there with questions. And that's why I really love art. Because sometimes there's like what is inside of them is so big, it's beyond words. And so whether I do the painting or whether we do stuff together, like we paint out the energy. And so I just ask them, like, what's the vibration of what you would like in your life? What color? And then somehow by them moving into that space of identifying that, it allows in like this tiny little gap of like, what would that be like? What are some of the things that like resonate with that? And it allows their body to have permission to like call it in.
I mean, I can really perceive what you're saying. And that space and yumminess of having someone kind of go with you on this. And what I hear you saying is that in a lot of ways, you're reflecting them back to themselves, and you're doing it through an energetic lens so that, you know, if you just have a portrait painted, right? Sometimes the first thing that we do is we go into judgment. Like we go into judgment about the painter and whether they got it right. We go into judgment about how we were portrayed. We go into the judgment about how we actually look, you know, in real life and all, you know, all this stuff. And now when you are going and saying, okay, you know, let's go and explore this together, and you're going into the energy of it, suddenly you're opening up this whole new set of possibilities for people to begin to perceive what's possible for themselves. Like you said, beyond the words.
Yeah.
And you said this other thing just before about, you said you were like the Walking Dead, and you said you were empty of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is so brilliant. And what I get with that is like this whole thing about not being enough. Is it actually that place where we're perceiving that we are empty of ourselves, right? And that not enough is actually our awareness that we are not choosing to fully be all that we actually could be choosing and being in the world. So cool.
Like, yes.
Right? I mean, the funny thing is it's all an illusion. I mean, it's really, it's like we get that there's this piece missing, but it's not actually that it's missing. It's just that we're going like this and being, you know, it's like, you can't see me.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And so many of the times, like, I wonder that people can see us, but we're pretending that we can't see us and they can't see us. And then, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been told that in my own life. Like, we saw all of you, like, duh. Like, when I was finally willing to, like, say, here I am, they're like, yeah, duh. Like,
that is so interesting. And there have been things, like early in coaching where I would look, you know, oftentimes it's like, okay, so comparison, right, can be this huge way to cripple ourselves, right? And if we're always trying to see ourselves through everybody else's eyes to make sure that what they see is how we want them to see us, right? Like, how much work is that?
Yeah.
And there's this other piece too, right? Consciousness includes everything, judges nothing, and everything that can look one way can also be the opposite at the same time. So with this comparison piece, and how people see us, not comparison, but how people see us, you know, I would sometimes use that exercise. Like, okay, so you may have this perception of yourself as XYZ. And now for just a minute, can we put that aside And now, if you were to look at yourself through the eyes of your best friend, if you were to look at yourself through the eyes of your boss or your coworkers, through the eyes of your partner, through the eyes of your children, through the eyes of the people in your community, what would you see then, right? And all of a sudden there's this whole other space that can open up, like, oh, well, wait a minute. Now I have this disconnect because I've been believing all of this about myself. And now I see that other people actually perceive me here. And now what do I do with that? And it's like, okay, and now what if this is that place of choice, right? Where you get to actually look at all of that and be like, okay, this works for me. That works for me. I chuck that out. I chuck that out. And the cool thing is you don't have to then like make your little mixture and then that's all you get. Like, it's like when you paint a painting, you don't just say, well, I use green and blue and red. And then for the rest of your life, you only ever use green and blue and red. Every time you go to make another stroke, you make another choice about what you're going to choose to create what you're going to create. So being able to, see the world as it is for everyone in it, and not having to be anything for anyone else, and not having to be anything specific for yourself in order to be okay. Mm-hmm. Simply just to be and to look at, okay, well, what is going to work for me now? And how about now? And how about now?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Tara, what, I love this. I have a quote actually, to quote Tara McCallum. When we were talking, and you said art, that you see art as a way of tapping into the energy that is limited by words. And we already looked at that a little bit, right? You were saying that when you go into these energy paintings, you're going beyond just what the words can convey and going into this other space. So can you talk to me a little bit more about that too? And maybe also for people who aren't super, who have a belief that maybe they're not super aware of energy, or even just like hear the word energy and are like, I don't get it. Can you invite us more into that space?
Sure. I mean, most people will identify with the fact that when they walk into a room, they sense things. Like they can sense if there's tension in the room, if there's joy in the room, what person would welcome them. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is the ability to sense energy. And so some people decide to turn it up, and some people decide to turn it down. I mean, I was definitely one of those people where I had high empathic abilities as a child, and it freaked me out. And so I turned them all as off as possible, because I was like reading people's thoughts. They were reading mine because I had mind transference. Like I could send thoughts out to other people. And I was like, no, this is not okay. I didn't have, sometimes words are beautiful because they give us the understanding like, oh, wow, I can play with this rather than being a victim of it. So for me, later in life, I was receiving so many awarenesses, and they were almost crippling to me. And so I went to the canvas, to a totally different space, because I was really that person before I went to art school and all of this. I was like fantastic at replication. In my interesting point of view, replication isn't necessarily art, because art is like bringing something new. And all of a sudden I had to go to the canvas and leave aside all the judgments that you were talking about earlier of like, am I going to get it right?
Yeah.
And I just went and like played with color, and also played with everything that I was aware of within myself first. And then I had it with someone else. Like I actually painted what I was receiving from them, and like really tapped in. I asked for permission first and really tapped into them, and then went to them and just said, you know, X, Y, and Z is going on in your life. Like I was really receiving clear stuff of like what they were struggling with, not just energies, but like words as well. And like, here's the wholeness that's behind all that. Cause like for some reason when I'm painting, like I receive I would like to say the future, but it's not the future. It's the wholeness of a person, like their infiniteness. And it's like, okay, cool. Like this is where you're like holding on to something. And what if you walked into this space, like just ever so slightly turned it, and then like all this light flows out. And for me, it is that space of energy. It's like the painting talks to me.
Yeah.
Like it starts to give me words rather than me giving it form and structure. It gives me words, and then I'm able to go back and talk to somebody and say, hey, I mean, I had a client, I'll give a real example. I did their whole family. And as I was doing their family, like I had the mother and the father in the center, like looking at each other and like done. I mean, like they were done. And painting, and I use water a lot because water conducts energy so brilliantly. And put the water on, and this little boy over here, like the water just kept like growing and expanding from him and going up over the mother's face especially, but a little bit the father's. And so I completely removed the water, went to bed that night, and got up the next morning. There was water, and it completely removed the mother's face. And I was like, wow, okay, all coming from this little boy. So I asked the painting, I'm like, okay, what is this message? Which I had already had an awareness of, and I wasn't willing to go to them and say, hey, some of these energies are in your life, like, what would you like to do with them? And so I called her up and I said, the energy is speaking, and she had already known, like, that this is what we were doing. And I was like, can I give you this information that it's coming up? Is your son like getting in between your marriage, and do you want to disappear?
Wow.
And she's like, how do you know I want to disappear? And I'm like, the painting
told me.
The painting told me. And she was just like, are you kidding? And, you know, and so then we were able to go into this space of like who she is, how aware she is, like some different tools that she could use. And then the entire painting completely changed. It was repainted, and the energy that came forth was so different. So I don't even know if that stuff makes sense, but like she's talked about it in many forums herself. Like, so this is completely public knowledge. It's not like I'm sharing a client. She's really happy to share that, like, wow, in all ways that we can receive things. And then her whole family was able to move into a different space. And then the painting didn't become about like what the energy difficulties were. It became like, what is this unit all together?
Wow. Yeah, I'm actually speechless. And for anybody who knows me and has watched the show, I generally always have something to say, right? Yeah, erring on that too much side. And I just, you know, not only do I get like what you're pointing at here with this, I also get everybody watching who's like, ooh, I want that. So for those of you who are like, oh, I want to have that experience, or I want to see what this is like, don't worry. We are going to put the information in the show notes so that you can you know, Tara does, like I said, do individual sessions. She also does commission pieces. So you will have that information so that you can connect with her. But that whole thing too of what you were saying about words and how the painting is really giving you the words, right? And it's like, I love how this really is another way of showing how there is this oneness, right? There is this information, this, like these energies, however you want to refer to it, that is everywhere and everything and we are that, and it is us, and it's all interconnected. And you being able to tap into this information through the canvas, and not try to use your brain to decide what it is, but really receive those words that the individual you're working with can actually receive and perceive. And Eckhart Tolle, he talks a lot about words, and it's the first place years ago when I read, I forget if it was The Power of Now or one of them, and he talks about words as signposts. And ever since I read that book, it made such an impression on me, really recognizing how words can be used to open doors, and they also have an inherent limitation. So if we only ever are going according to the word itself and, you know, all the definitions that we've decided it is, we can actually lose a lot of what's actually there. And so being able to kind of find this place, right? Like even using the words enough or control, right? If we look at the Webster's dictionary, it's one thing. And yet when we start to play with them, we start to realize that there actually can be a lot of different energy and a lot of different energies swirling around those words that that otherwise we might not recognize. You know, it's almost like words really do, it's like they are alive in and of themselves, and they're not just these like little, I don't know, like pebbles that we just kind of like throw out and around that are just solid and that's it. So opening these doors of possibility to people, when you're having these conversations and people are coming to your classes, coming into sessions, what are you perceiving in terms of this conversation of, we've talked about not being enough. Do you ever have people coming in with their concern of being too much, like the tree that's only willing, you know, people may have heard of the tallest poppy syndrome, right? Where in Australia, the poppies have a governing mechanism. Well, it just poppies in general have a governing mechanism where they all will grow to about the same height, right? Because if you're a little too tall, that's danger time. You can get your head lopped off. And so, you know, the tree, if it doesn't want to be too much, right, it may stop too. As opposed to just continuing to ever expand and ever grow. So do you see that ever coming up as well, where people aren't really functioning from a place of not enough, but limiting where they're willing to go and what they're willing to choose by not wanting to go too far?
Yeah, I think they're so often married because the very same people who feel that they're not enough, it's going back to that, what you said earlier, usually they've emptied themselves out so much to be what other people are requiring. Yeah. That a lot of times they're afraid to show who they are because what they think that they are is the too much, like too loud, too fast, too funny, whatever it is. And so it's really like coming to this space of like, we are all energies, and like, just really, some people like tiptoe into it and other people like just jump right in and they're like, okay, cool. Like, I kind of do know who I am. I'm just going to be it and see like what some reactions are from other people. And a lot of times they find that they're the biggest reactors. It's not even other people who are as reacting as largely the perceived reactions. Yeah.
Yeah. How much do we do that, right? Like someone says something to us at some point in our life, and then we've used that as a way of limiting ourselves forever. And then at some point you have this conversation and like you get the awareness and it comes out like, well, but you said this. And so I never that, or I always did this because of that. And they look at you and they're like, really, that happened? And it's like not even in their world, and yet you've lived all these years attaching, you know, this significance to them, right? And they're not even aware that that has been created in your reality. there's that show, This Is Us. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's on television. And they just had an episode, and I was having this conversation with my husband about, look, this is how choice creates, and this is how things show up, and we just don't even realize what we're creating. And like, there's this thing between the mom and the daughter, right? And they're flashing back and showing these moments in the daughter's childhood, right? And she's about to sing at school, and the mother has made her a new dress and is like so proud of her and whatever, but her mother, played by Mandy Moore, who has a wonderful voice, is singing in the shower as they're getting ready, and the little girl's all excited with her new dress and opens the bathroom door and hears her mother singing the song that she's going to be singing that night. And in that moment decides that she's not as good as her mom at singing and will never be as good as her mom at singing, and then began to shut herself down in that place. And then fast forward to present time, and she gets this singing gig with a house band, and she doesn't want her mom to show up, but her mom comes and is so proud of her, and she's upset that her mom is there, having this sense that it's her mom's fault that she never felt good enough as a singer, whereas the mom's like, I was just being, and doesn't even know what we know as viewers, because she was in the shower and we got to see it and she didn't. So it's like all these places where we create these realities based on something that we see, and then that just colors everything else that shows up, even if it's something that we have fabricated that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world besides in our minds. Right? Yeah. The last episode that we did with Erin Chanel, the title of that was Wrongness as the container for insanity, right? And this is just another one of those illustrations where, like, we take that limitation, whatever we've decided, and that becomes another container. And then inside of that, we bounce around creating all this insanity because we've decided now that there's no other possibility and there's nothing else to choose. Mm-hmm. So anyway, just to bring in some pop culture. So we are beginning to get to the end of our hour together. One of the things that I love from the Right Voice for You facilitator training is this thing of like, really just choose. And you talked earlier about this thing of like having to get like to be able to see your dark spot and get over it and whatever, and then you can choose like all the yummy stuff. Mm-hmm. And and in that class with Right Voice for You, it's like, okay, so you're going to walk across the stage, and like you can either get up and then tell everybody about, how you're going to be nervous, or you're going to tell them how you can't sing, or tell them that you don't know the words, or you're going to tell them whatever, right, as your start. Or you can just choose to get out on the stage and just do it and just show up, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that is also that invitation here of like, yeah, what if, like, starting right now, you never had to be in lack of you. Yeah. And you never
apologize for being us, because all that like beginning part really is the apology. Yeah. So people don't judge you. And it's like, no, whoever I am, I don't apologize. Yeah. I don't compare. I'm not asking you to apologize either. Like, could we just choose and invite ourselves to be? Yeah.
Yeah. So, just what would it take for all of us to play with that and just see what shows up? I mean, we already know how the other stuff works, right? And so it's like, what if we just do a little something different? And what could we create then? So, Tara, what can you invite everyone to, and where can they find you, and in what ways can they play with you starting right away?
Right away. I have two websites, actually. One is my name, Tara McCullum, and that's for all creative art and web design. And then the other one that I do is really, they're both energy work, but the other one is my coaching classes and things like that. That's beyondthisreality.com, because I super love living beyond the rules of this reality and creating beyond this reality. So those two are probably the easiest places. And then Facebook is my name plus CLC at the end. So Tara McCullum CLC.
Awesome.
And yeah, so those are fun places. Yeah.
And you're on Facebook as well.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who is in the Wisconsin area and everyone who's willing to get on a plane, you have a juicy retreat coming up in November.
I do. Yeah. It's right on Lake Beulah. So I'm super excited about that. So we'll be doing bars and energy art and meditation walks, and Maura, who is the host, she's actually going to be doing some recipes and teaching people some things about fun and yummy food. So, yeah, it'll be exciting, and more retreats. I'm telling you, the universe is like, hey girl.
I hear you. That energy is up. Yeah, I get it. And how did we get all so lucky to be able to play with all of this? And Tara, I am so grateful for you being here today. Thank you so much for this conversation. You know, what can we choose when we know that we are the whole being that we be right now? We don't have to fix anything, and that we can never be too much, and we can always choose more. Acknowledging the gratitude that we have for what is, and always asking, hey, universe, that was pretty awesome. What else you got? Show me more, please. What else can I play with, and what else can I choose that I never have chosen before? So those of you watching, if you enjoy the Art of Creation show, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please like the Facebook page. And as always, submit questions, comments. Let us know if there's a particular guest you'd love to see, any conversations you'd like to have. And we're so grateful to have you watching. So Tara, thank you so much. And everybody else, I wonder what you'll choose this coming week. We'll see you next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.